I'm back, and in one piece this time. Before I talk about my targets, I'm going to address a few concerns from my last post. A lot of you were concerned with my bite I suffered from Ghoul. As far as I know, I haven't contracted anything. I was told whatever they did to me shouldn't be contagious, but I made them run tests regardless, all of which came up to be negative. They did give me some special pills, but I was told these were to help speed up the recovery of my shoulder. I wouldn't be surprised if they were hiding something from me. I just hope that if I do start craving human flesh, I would still have enough mental fortitude to pull the trigger one last time. Another thing I wanted to address is who I work for. I only ever refer to my boss as the government, and that is simply because I have no clue what branch this is. It's possible this isn't the government at all, but I doubt that. It's far too ingrained to not be. It could be the CIA, but I'm not certain. The only questions I ask are the ones that will hopefully keep me alive longer. Now let's talk about a few more of my assignments. After my month-long break recovery from Ghoul, I was given an easier assignment to ease my way back into things. Codenamed Romeo. Romeo was made to be a charmer. He was a true Adonis in every sense of the word. Romeo makes the statue of David look ugly in comparison. From what I can tell, he was designed to charm women, foreigner diplomats probably, but instead, he charms anyone and everyone, which is how he was able to charm his way out of his holding cell. Romeo isn't really a danger to anyone though, except perhaps himself should he find himself at the hands of an angry spouse, but I'm sure he could get himself out of that one too. Finding Romeo was easy, but the hard part would be extracting him. He was always surrounded by a crowd, almost like a cult. If there was a high-class party, Romeo would be there, and he would never return to his room with less than 10 people following him. I would need a good plan to separate him from his entourage. I decided to attend one of his parties, just so I could get a better scope of the situation. It was crucial that I find any openings he might have. What I didn't expect though was for Romeo to approach me. "Good evening, monsieur. I do not believe we have met before. I am Romeo, and you?" "Monsieur, was that in French?" I think I almost threw up in my mouth a bit. I guess I should have expected this though. He has quite the ego after all. It was good to see his charm wasn't working on me. I'm not entirely sure why, but I think it might have something to do with my disgust at just how perfect he is. I'm James. I'm kinda new here. Nice to meet you, Romeo," I managed to respond. "James, what a fabulous name, but alone at a party? Unacceptable. Come with me. My friend and I are about to return to my estate. I will show you the finer parts of the city." Is this the sexual reference? Regardless, this was going to be much better than expected. I was making direct contact with my target. If I went to his home, perhaps I could just wait until everyone fell asleep and sneak away with Romeo before anyone knew better. "I don't know, we just met. I wouldn't want to impose on you like that," I said. "No, I insist, you must. Samantha, go with my friend James here and guide him to my home. I'll be there shortly. There's someone I must see first," Romeo said, while motioning to one of the women from his group. Samantha did indeed guide me to Romeo's home. I already knew where he lived, of course, but I had to play dumb. Romeo's estate was a true mansion, with aesthetics that would make you think that someone had designed the home in the game The Sims. I was then brought inside. The rest of Romeo's entourage would arrive shortly after. I was offered some scotch that had apparently aged over 100 years. I'm not much of a drinker, but I accepted it nonetheless. Romeo arrived almost an hour later, fashionably late to his own party. Once he arrived though, he immediately approached me. "James, follow me, there's something I must show you," he said to me. I didn't hesitate to follow him. This was my chance to be alone with him. I could tranquilize him and be on my way before anyone knew any better. He led me to a room on the other side of the home. The room was something else, something I didn't expect. The walls were covered with pictures, man and woman. Each one was a different person. I think I even noticed a few of them from his group. "What is this?" I said without even thinking. "These are the people I have conquered, and you are next. Please remove your clothing." Romeo said this as he turned his back on me and began to remove his own clothing. I almost felt compelled to remove my own clothing. His words held such power, but I was able to hold out. Instead, I approached him and sunk a trank into his neck. I made sure to duct tape his mouth. I had heard enough of his word for one night. Romeo was much bigger than me, so it was quite an effort dragging him out of his window and back to my vehicle, but I managed to do it before anyone got suspicious. I assume his friend simply thought he was taking his time in conquering me. I dropped off Romeo and made sure to shower extra well that night. My experience with Romeo almost made me miss my date with Ghoul. Almost. My next assignment would be another fun one, codenamed Kong. What happened when you splice human DNA with gorilla DNA? Well, apparently you get Kong. Personally, I would have preferred the name Caesar, in reference to Planet of the Apes, but I suppose he's not a gorilla, and I don't get to pick the names anyway. Kong is essentially a smaller version of Bigfoot, and before you ask if Bigfoot exists, I have to say I don't know. I haven't been tasked with hunting him yet. Kong would be a kill task. There's no guarantee the tranks would work, not to mention he had to kill 2 scientists during his escape, so they weren't too worried about him coming back alive. They just wanted to dissect what was left of him. I was given specific parameters as to avoid the head if at all possible. They mostly wanted to examine the brain, and that wouldn't be possible if I splattered it all on the ground. Another problem I faced was my experience with long-range weapons. It had been part of my training, of course, and I had gotten through the basics, but that was about it. I had been told most of my missions would be up close and personal, so it wasn't that important. Well, it was starting to seem important now. Similar to Ghoul, Kong had taken up a residence in a forest area, but since his diet didn't consist of human meat, he had chosen a much more secluded area. I don't think Kong really wanted to hurt anyone. He could live his life out in these woods without bothering anyone, but that's not what the government wanted. My superiors informed me that they had already done overhead sweeps of the area and were able to tell me exactly where the cave he was staying in was located. Of course they had done the easy part, and I get to do all the dirty work on the ground. I made my way to a vantage point overlooking the cave and set up the sniper rifle they had supplied me with. Now all I had to do was wait. After a few hours, Kong finally made his appearance. He walked out of the cave and began to stretch his limbs, the way most of us do when we wake up. I steadied the rifle and aimed the crosshairs over where I assumed his heart was, and I pulled the trigger. But I missed. I hadn't taken into account the wind had picked up since I started waiting, and the bullet had strayed to the right of Kong, hitting the rock of the cave. Kong didn't move though, instead he simply turned his gaze to me, with eyes that were all too human. He didn't try to escape. He knew I would come eventually, and if it wasn't me, it would be someone else. Kong had accepted his fate. I had killed the Rippler, of course, but that was different. I had done it while he was asleep. I didn't have to see the look in his eyes before he died. I almost wish Kong had been a monster like Ghoul. That way I wouldn't have to feel bad about putting him down. With a slight hesitation, I reloaded my gun. I took aim, accounting for the wind now, and I fired once again. Bullseye. Kong went down instantly. I made my way over to confirm he was dead, and luckily he was. He wouldn't have to suffer anymore. Kong weighed far too much for me to drag back on my own. Instead, I set off a flare I had been giving for this moment, and waited for the air team to come and collect him. Sitting to Kong's lifeless body really made me begin to question my line of work. I had never felt so disgusted in myself, but I knew there was no way out for me. I'm already in far too deep. Perhaps the government had created another monster in me, and someday they will have to put me down too. But for now, I'm still doing their dirty work. If you'll excuse me, writing about Kong has really brought my mood down. I'll be back, and I'll be sure to include one of my most exciting assignments next time, but I think I need to lie down for a bit. Until next time. I'm back, and with me, I bring a few more of my assignments. I'm not sure how much time I have, so I'll have to jump right into it. Codenamed Dahlia. Dahlia is a doll. A ventriloquist doll to be exact. Despite her simple looks, she's quite dangerous. Probably not in the way that most of you would expect though. She can't move on her own. Well, she can speak, but that's it. So she won't be running around your home in the middle of the night stabbing people. No, instead Dahlia has an incredible strong power of influence. One look into her eyes and she'll have complete control of you. It's a bit ironic, really. A ventriloquist doll making humans her puppet. In my briefing, I was told Dahlia is essentially the definition of sadistic. She enjoys making her victims inflict as much pain as possible into the world before eventually disposing of them. I'm not sure if demons are real, but if they are, I'm sure that's what is trapped in that doll. Dahlia was believed to be staying with a family of 4. She had been taken there by a scientist who had fallen under her control. She had only been gone about a week, but there's no telling what she could have gotten up to in that time. The scientist who had taken her had returned to her workplace a day later and attempted to murder her co-workers, but was quickly taken care of. I made my way to the family's home, hoping to be surprised by what I saw. Let's just say I got my wish, but not in the way I hoped. I knocked on the front door. After a few minutes of no response, I turned the handle to find out that the door was unlocked. I wish it wasn't. The moment I stepped into that home, I was hit with a putrid smell. One that I know means death. The walls were coated in blood. Some of it was dry, some was fresh and still slowly dripping down. I found the family together in the living room. The mother and the 2 children were sat in a small triangle. They were already dead and rotting. Their stomachs had been cut open with their entrails hanging out. They had been posed in a way to make it look as if they were eating their own organs. In the center of that triangle was the father, hanging from the ceiling. He had scratches and cuts all over him, but that was nothing compared to what had happened to his family. Just before I was about to spill my lunch all over the floor, I heard a voice from the opposite corner of the room. "You're just in time. What do you think about my art? It's a little sloppy, but I'm sure it will get better in the time," the voice said. "Dahlia?" I questioned. "Aw, have you come to get me already? I was having so much time too. Well, I'm done here anyway. I guess you can take me back for now. I'll be out again soon." I made my way over to the voice, making sure to keep my head down. I had no intentions of ending up like that family. When I got close, I closed my eyes. I managed to pick her up and flip her over, and I made my way back out to my vehicle. "Let me sit up in front. I like to have conversations during my car rides. Plus, you can't get much action from women in this line of work, so it'll be fun for both of us," Dahlia said mockingly. As much as I wanted to chunk her in the back and throw a blanket or something over her, I also didn't want her to be out of my line of sight, so I granted her wish. I carefully sat her up in front, turning her head towards the window. I'd be lying if I said part of me wasn't curious about her. I wanted to know more about what makes her a monster. "You should just take me home with you. Tell your boss I wasn't here. I'm sure we could have lots of fun together," Dahlia said. "Yes, I'm sure you would make great kindling for a fire," I responded. "Hehehehe, yeah, you're funny, I like you. I was thinking I'd have someone kill you eventually, but maybe I'll keep you." "Oh, I thought you killed everyone," I asked. "Of course not. I like to let the really bad ones live. It's more fun that way," Dahlia said. "What do you mean by that? Are you saying I'm a bad person?" It made me a bit angry. I had almost turned to look at Dahlia, but I thought better of it. Was she trying to provoke me? "You aren't quite on my level yet, but I see potential in you. You didn't even scream when you saw my work. Maybe if you enjoyed seeing it. You might think we are different, but we really aren't," Dahlia replied. She was partly right. I hadn't reacted when I saw the bodies. I had felt a little sick, but if I'd seen that a few months ago, I would have probably passed out. Whether I like it or not, I am definitely changing, and I don't think it's for the good. "What are you?" I finally asked after a few minutes of silence. "Look into my eyes and I'll tell you." "Nice try. I may be stupid, but I'm not that stupid," I responded, almost bursting out into laughter. "What are you afraid of? Do you think you would see yourself if you looked into my eyes?" "Okay, that's enough. One more word and I'm googling where the nearest wood chipper is." Those were the last words I spoke on our little road trip together. I dropped off Dahlia and informed them about the mess at the house. They said they would send someone to clean it up. I was hoping they would give me a break after what I seen, but I wouldn't be so lucky. As soon as I turned in Dahlia, they told me they already had a new assignment ready for me. Codename Jack. Grandiose name, I know. This was probably the oddest assignment I had received yet though. Jack was, from what I could tell, entirely human. I had no clue why I had been tasked with finding a human. Perhaps he was a runaway scientist or someone who knew too much, but he certainly wasn't what I had gotten used to hunting. I was told Jack was incredibly dangerous though, and that I shouldn't take any risk in trying to capture him alive. In other words, they want him dead. This only made me more curious as to what secrets that Jack must have held. Jack was constantly on the move, so it wasn't easy to find him, but my training had paid off, and I was eventually able to track him down. I watched him from afar. He didn't seem dangerous to me. Suspicious and cautious, yes, but not dangerous. One night he stepped out of his hotel room to get food, so I decided to let myself in. Jack and I needed to have a talk. Jack didn't seem too surprised when he returned to his room to find me sitting on the couch. He simply held out his arms. So they did send someone for me after all. Well, go ahead and do whatever you have to do. I won't fight it, he said. Sit down, Jack. I just want to talk. Jack raised an eyebrow to this. A curious one, huh? You know what they say about curiosity, right? I rolled my eyes and once again mentioned for Jack to sit down. Who are you, Jack, and why did they send me after you? You don't know? I'm you. Or at least I used to be. They just tell us where to go, who to kill, who to bring back alive, and we just do it. No question asked. I couldn't handle it anymore. So here I am, and here you are, Jack explained. This took me back for a second. I had known he had some connections to my agency, but I have never considered he had been in the same position as me. So there really was no way out, other than death, that is. I rocked across the room, pulled out my gun, and killed Jack. I had the answers I came here for. Perhaps Dahlia was right. We aren't so different after all. I returned with Jack's body. I wasn't asked to give my usual debriefing. Instead, I was just given a simple nod and told to go home and wait for my next assignment. I wonder if this was another test. If it had been, I'm sure I passed with flying colors. I would understand if y'all think less of me for the choices I've made. But if it wasn't me, it would be someone else regardless. This was the life I had chosen, or perhaps the life that was chosen for me. Nonetheless, I can't back down now. I'm simply one discardable person in the whole scheme of things. Don't mistake my actions for blind loyalty though. I know the people I work for aren't good people. I simply know my place in this world, and the minute I stop being useful, I will end up like Jack. How does that saying go already? It's better the devil you know than the devil you don't. I'm basically a cog in a giant machine, and once my cog stops working, I'll be discarded and replaced by another. Despite the fact that I risk death every day that I wake up, I never felt more alive. I no longer have nightmares of those I've killed. I've stopped caring about things like that. If I become too soft, then I will end up like Jack, and I have no intentions of letting that happen. After I disposed of Jack, I was given a week off. It had been a while since I had any time to myself. It was a bit strange. I never had many friends to begin with, and my work has distanced me from the few family members I had kept in touch with. This week off made me realize just how empty my life had become. Was this what they had wanted? Regardless, I was at work the minute my week was up, ready for my next assignment, and I got one. Codename Mimic. As her name implies, Mimic is a master of disguise. She has the ability to morph her face into a perfect replica of anyone she chooses, but she is unable to change her body. I imagine she's still a work in progress. Can you imagine what the government could do if they could create perfect body doubles of anyone they wanted? Mimic had escaped with a few other experiments, but she was the top priority. It was believed that they all split up, but I was still warned to be on the lookout in case any of them teamed up. Due to her ability, Mimic would be incredibly difficult to locate. Because of this, several hunters like me were given her as an assignment. If her information was correct, then she had not made it out to the city we live in yet. But if she had, we may never find her. The only way we would be able to identify her is by the distinct scar on her left shoulder. The government had set up roadblocks at all of the city's exits, while us hunters searched within. 3 other hunters and myself were each given a quadrant to search. Mimic had no family, so she would either have to break into somewhere or find an abandoned location to stay. I spent several hours walking the streets of my quadrant, asking strangers if they had seen the suspicious looking woman, as well as checking old decrepit homes that hadn't been lived in years. I found nothing though. That was until I was approached by a slender, young looking man, probably early 20s. Are you looking for someone? The man asked. Yeah, it's hard to explain. I'm looking for a girl, but I'm not entirely sure what she looks like, I replied. Aren't we all? The man chuckled before continuing. But I may be able to help you. I saw a girl run into an old building around the corner. She was acting pretty weird, constantly looking over her shoulder. Maybe she's who you're looking for. Thank you, I'll check that right now, I said as I pushed past the man, not giving his words a second thought. I quickly made my way to the building and let myself in. To my amazement, Mimic was actually there, but it wasn't quite what I expected. Mimic was tied to a chair. I knew it was her because her scar was in clear view. No other hunters had contacted me to tell me that they moved into my area or that they had found Mimic. So why was she tied up? That's when I remembered who told me that I would find her here. The stranger. Before I could even turn around, I heard his voice. It's a gift. She's quite important to them, isn't she? It was the strange young man that I had just met, but he wasn't behind me. No, he was in front of me, near Mimic. How had he gotten in front of me? I had almost sprinted over here. Who are you? I asked. That's not important right now. Are you going to thank me? Oh wait, that's not important either. The real reason I'm here is to deliver you a message, the man said. A message? From who? I was truly perplexed. As I said earlier, I had made contact with almost no one. Don't look so confused, friend. It's from your girlfriend. Have you already forgotten her? Dahlia would be so upset to hear that, the man mockingly replied. I immediately cut him off. Dahlia is not my girlfriend. Dahlia is a demonic doll that I want nothing to do with, unless it involves a large fire. The man laughed before responding. She said you would have something like that. Regardless, she just wants you to know that she's coming to pick you up soon, that she really misses you. Now if you will excuse me. The man turned and began to walk away. Where do you think you're going? I said as I pulled out my tranq gun and aimed it at him. He didn't respond, nor did he stop walking, so I fired. My aim was dead on. Well, it would have been, but the dart passed right through the man as if he wasn't even there. He continued walking straight up to the wall and proceeded to walk through. What the hell just happened? A man appears out of nowhere and leads me to Mimic, and then he tells me that Dahlia is coming for me. To top it off, there's obviously something going on with that man too. Seeing that he knew Dahlia, but also the fact that objects passed directly through his body. Was he under her control? I don't know what was going on at all, but I still had a job to do, and my target was right in front of me. I let the other hunters know that I had found the target, and I was taking her back. When I took her back, I was almost expecting some sort of a praise, but I knew that would be unlikely despite her value. I would be surprised once again when I made it back to the holding facility. The whole place was in complete lockdown, while whatever was able to be locked down. Half of the building had been blown off. The facility was located outside of town in a secluded area for obvious reasons, so I knew no innocent people had died. But I did see the corpses of many scientists and guards strewn around the area. I know some of them had families, but these people weren't exactly angels. I managed to find one of my superiors who was able to briefly fill me in on the situation. While our forces had been thinned looking for Mimic, a group had attacked the facility. It's obvious they were looking for a particular experiment, but it's unsure exactly who they were after at this point. Around 20 of the 50 experiments held in this facility had escaped. I tried asking which of the experiments escaped, but I was told that that was confidential. They simply told me to leave Mimic with them, and to go home and wait for them to sort this out. I would be busy soon. Part of me already knows at least one of the experiments who escaped. Was she the target? I think it's a big possibility. It was already told she's coming for me. I'm not sure what's about to happen, but it can't be good. It had been a few days since the attack on the facility. I was temporarily sent home while the government sorted out the mess. With half of the building blown off, it wouldn't do much good to start hunting down the experiments before we had a place to store them. I was able to sleep about 4 hours before my phone rang. It was time to hunt down the escapees. Myself and the 3 other hunters that had helped look for Mimic were all called in. We were given a short list of experiments that had escaped. To my dismay, Dahlia was in fact on the list. She couldn't move on her own, so it was clear she was with another one of the experiments. Which one? I had no clue. I tried flipping through the pages to see if the man I'd seen with Mimic was on the list, but he wasn't. We were able to find about half of the 20 escapees within the first day. Some of the experiments just stand out a bit too much, and with no one to help them on the outside, they were just sitting ducks. There were still 11 at large though. Dahlia was one of them. I kept hoping every time we found a new lead that they would be the one carrying Dahlia, but unfortunately that was not the case. After doing a quick sweep on the nearby city with no new results, we were all sent home to rest. The government would go through the cameras and contact us if they found anything. They were also calling in reinforcements after the attack, trying to find out who orchestrated it. There was absolutely no way I was going home with a killer doll stalking me though. Instead, I made sure that I wasn't being followed. I parked my car on a random street and found a small hotel. It was a crappy, run-down place, but that oddly made me feel safer. I slept with my lethal gun in my hand and my train gun nearby. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep much, but it would only be for the worse if Dahlia did come and I was too exhausted to fight back. The night went by with no incidents though. I was called early in the morning once again. It turns out 2 experiments had been spotted together. They had stolen a car and were on the route to leave the city. The people back at the facility would slow them down as much as possible with stoplights. They wanted me and another one of the hunters to meet up and follow them. They could possibly lead us to more of the escaped. I was able to quickly meet up with one of the hunters from before. He was probably mid-30s, so he had probably been doing this much longer than I had. Luckily, we were able to catch sight of the stolen vehicle just before it left town. Despite knowing they had been slowed down, it seemed too easy. The car began taking back roads and eventually pulled into an old cabin. Despite us being the only car behind it most of the time, it didn't seem to show any unusual behavior as to suggest it knew we were following it. The other hunter pulled over a short distance from the cabin and he began to ready himself. I pulled out my phone. This was obviously a trap. I thought that maybe I could call backup, but the other hunter stopped me. "Listen kid, I've been doing this for a long time. I know this is probably a trap, but do you really think you're going to send anyone to help us? We're on our own. You can either help me or sit out here and wait. I'm going in." "Well then, after you I suppose," I replied coldly. I knew he was probably right though. The government didn't care much about us. They would probably have just scolded me and asked what I was waiting for. So I began to gear up as well. Death might be favorable compared to whatever Dahlia wanted to do with me. The other and I exited the vehicle and made our way as sneakily as possible in daylight. Once we made it to the door, the hunter gave me a countdown of 3 before throwing some sort of grenade through the window. It exploded into gas, quickly filling the home. I couldn't help but wonder why I have not gotten access to these grenades before. After the gas had mostly dispersed, we covered our noses with our shirts and went inside. We instantly found one of the experiments unconscious on the floor. If I remember correctly, her codename was Trauma. By touching someone, she could force them to see their worst nightmares. I guess since waterboarding is too inhumane, she must be the solution. The other hunter began to make his way over to her and began restraining her, while I watched his back. He was almost done when everything went black. When I turned my back, I saw the other hunter was tied to a chair in front of me. He was still unconscious. I then looked down to see I was in the same situation. I was firmly tied down to a chair. "Ah, you're finally awake," a male voice to my side said. I turned to look. It was the man from before, the one that had walked through the wall. He was also sat in a chair, but he wasn't tied up. I doubt any sort of bindings could hold him anyway. On his lap sat a doll. The doll had a hood pulled up just enough to cover its eyes. The man began to speak again. "It's actually a bit funny. Last time we met, I gave you someone tied in a chair, and now you yourself are tied up." "What do you want?" I replied, not in the mood for any games, not that I had much choice. "I told you Dahlia here was coming to pick you up, but instead you came to see her yourself." "How sweet of you," the man said. "Did you really miss me that much?" Dahlia finally spoke up. "Can you just kill me already? Do whatever you're going to do with me," I responded. "I told you, I'll let the bad ones live, and you have been quite bad recently. Killing that poor man Jack, it was a bit fast, but I'm sure you still enjoyed it," Dahlia said, mocking me. "I just did what I was told." He knew what he signed up for. Yes, he did. The rest of us are not so fortunate. All of our lives were turned into games by the government. The only difference between us is that you had a choice. The rest of the experiments and myself never had the luxury of knowing what we were getting into, Dahlia said. "So what? You want to overthrow the government? Expose them or something?" I questioned. Dahlia began to laugh. "Heavens no. They are far too powerful for that, and there are too few of us to even think about challenging them. I simply don't care enough about something like that. No, I simply wanted you. What do you want from me? I may have done terrible things, but I'm still nothing like you, I replied. Maybe not yet, but you will be soon enough. After she said this, 2 new people entered the room. They were both wearing lab coats. One held a syringe, and once he reached me, he plunged it into my arm, releasing the fluids. Once again, the world went black. I awoke again to find myself looking at 2 bodies. One was the hunter, the other was mine. Both had a bullet hole in the head. How was that possible? Am I dead? Then how am I still seeing this? I quickly looked down at myself, fearing the worst. I wasn't trapped in a doll, I still appeared human. I touched my face and the rest of my body, and it still felt solid, and I was still capable of picking things up. So why was my body seemingly dead on the floor? It's incredible, isn't it? It looks exactly like you, even down to the fingerprints. One of the experiment's abilities. The other one isn't a replica though. He's quite dead, and done in with your gun by the way. This came from the voice of the ghost-like man from before. What did you do to me? I asked. I knew something happened to me. The man simply shrugged. Nothing really. It seems as if your body rejected the serum they had planned for you. Rejected? Well, at least that was one thing to be happy about. Although I was still stuck in a room with one of the captors, as well as a dead body and a replica of my own dead body. So what now? I asked, even though I wasn't sure I'd get a direct answer. Since the serum didn't work, Dahlia has a last plan for you. As he said this, the door once more opened. Dahlia was brought back into the room by Trauma, this time with no hood. I was no longer tied up, but I knew there was still no way for me to escape yet. So I stood still as Trauma approached me with Dahlia in hand. Once Trauma stood directly in front of me, I crouched down and looked directly into Dahlia's eyes. I wouldn't fight fate. What I saw in those eyes was pure evil. I saw countless wars, murders, deaths, suicides. It seemed to be endless tragedies. I didn't lose control of myself though. Instead, I quickly reached for the lighter that I had been hiding in my shoe ever since I knew Dahlia had escaped. I flicked it almost instantly and held it to Dahlia's dress. She went up in a blaze. There was no stopping the fire. Trauma and the strange man desperately tried to stop it, but it was as if Dahlia had been soaked in gasoline. I took a second to smile before sprinting out the door. I saw several people on my way out of the house, but none of them seemed concerned with me. They all were trying to get to the room with Dahlia. I knew the whole cabin would get a light soon, so I just needed to get out. Once I made it outside, I quickly ran to where the hunter's car had been parked. It was surprisingly still there. They hadn't moved it yet, but he still had the key. So I smashed the window and hot-wired the car as quickly as possible and sped off. By the time I drove by, the fire in the cabin was massive. I almost hoped that all of those inside would die, but they had been all under Dahlia's control. It's possible there were some good people among them, but I let them die instead. As I continued to move forward, I've been hiding out ever since that day. I know writing this only puts me in more danger, but this story needed to be put out there. It's almost guaranteed the government will read this, and perhaps they will send someone after me. But I don't care anymore. I won't be a puppet to anyone, not to the government, and not to the psychotic doll. I'm officially done hunting down the government's mistakes.